I can't tell you how thrilled I am to introduce you again to Stockton University to officially kick off Time for Turbine 7. My name is Doug O'Malley. I serve as the Director of Environment New Jersey and the co-chair of Jersey Renews, which represents more than 70 organizations spanning labor, the environment, community, business, and faith. And our goal is very simple. We want to expand clean energy, we want to reduce climate pollutants, and we want to expand an equitable green economy. It's really wonderful to be back here, not only at Stockton, but also to thank all of you for coming. We've come a long way over the course of the last 7 years when we first started off in the cramped control room at ACUA, just a few miles away here in Atlantic City. And what we're going to hear today, we're now at a two-day event, so thank you for helping us to kick this off. We're going to hear from a panel from our top state decision makers in just a moment or two. We're going to have a keynote address on public health and the impacts of air pollution. We're going to have field trips literally across South Jersey to be able to see the science of offshore wind and the progress we're making right now on the offshore wind supply chain, as well as a reception this evening headlined by First Lady Tammy Murphy. And the reason why this is so important, of course, is the last few weeks really have been a roller coaster, or even the last day. Many of us have friends and family that were in harm's way in Tennessee, in North Carolina, in Georgia, and of course, Florida. How many people have friends and family right now in Florida? How many people have friends close to the Tampa area? How are they doing? Yeah, we don't know. We see the pictures. There's 3 million people that lost power last night. Tampa Bay literally sucked out into the ocean before it came rushing back with a 13-foot storm surge. The Tampa Bay Rays Stadium was shredded. Cranes were blown over in Tampa Bay last night. So, and that's saying nothing. I certainly don't want to take away from the destruction that we've seen from Helene across the region, right? This is obviously, these are not talking points. This is not rhetoric. When we talk about climate change, it is real, and it's literally destroying our communities. And when we think about what climate change looks like, there's a deep, profound nature of why we're here in Atlantic City, right, on our barrier island. You know, in a little less than 3 weeks, we're going to mark, certainly not celebrate, but mark the 12th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy and the impact that that had, not just in Atlantic City and Atlantic County, but the entire state, and the families that are still impacted from those storms, right? So again, when we talk about climate change, it is not rhetorical. And I think it's important to know that it's not just the impact of hurricanes. Phoenix just broke a record for 16 days in a row, we're obviously in October now, of degrees that are more than 100, right? 2024 will be the warmest year on record, of course, followed by last year, which was a record-breaking summer. This year was the warmest summer on record. So when we kind of talk about climate change, it's real, it's impacting us now. And that's really why it's so important that we kind of mark this year of the progress we've made on offshore wind. We've seen projects that have gone online and spinning in New York and Massachusetts. The supply chain is developed across New England. The port of New London and Connecticut is up and running with monopiles. And of course, the original project off Block Island continues to spin. Now, this is obviously progress in America and offshore wind. In Europe, there's 5,400 turbines for offshore wind. Last year, they almost had 3 gigawatts of offshore wind come online, and over the next 3 years, they're projected to hit 5 gigawatts per year. So when we kind of think about offshore wind, it is not an untested technology. It is real. It is happening. It's happening across the world, and it's certainly happening across America, and we want it to happen here in New Jersey. And when we think of, obviously, not just the progress in other places, the progress that has happened in New Jersey, we've had truly a banner year. We've had 2 winners of the 4th solicitation run by the BPU. We've had the announcement of a 5th solicitation for bids, and the announcement early last week by BOEM of announcing the COP construction permit for Atlantic Shores, as well as the ongoing process for the pre-build infrastructure for offshore wind transmission in Monmouth County. And then, of course, the New Jersey Windport, which we'll hear more about tomorrow, which has completed its first stage of construction for the region's largest marshaling and ultimately what will be manufacturing in Salem County right along the banks of the Delaware. This has happened because of the tremendous dedication of our state agencies. We'll hear from our state leaders in just a minute, from BPU, from EDA, from DEP, and the governor's office. There's, as well as the Department of Labor, there's been just a tremendous amount of work that has happened, not just by the heads of those agencies, but by staff. Work that is paying off. And that's partially what this Time for Turbines is to show the progress that we've made. Now, obviously, there are challenges, right? We have a global macro financial market that is choppy. We have concerted misinformation campaigns that continue to put out false information on offshore wind. And there's also the hidden challenge that we don't see as much, an electric grid that is increasingly unreliable because of the dependence on fossil fuels. That is why the status quo is not acceptable. We need to expand offshore wind and clean energy to make a more reliable grid. We're going to hear about both of those topics more tomorrow. But I just want to remind us, too, that offshore wind obviously isn't just about climate, it's also about air pollution that affects our most vulnerable residents, especially in our urban communities. We'll hear more about that from Dr. Lisa Tracheo, who is a doctor at Cooper Medical School, on what that impact looks like today on our lungs and why, obviously, offshore wind is so critical. And I want to conclude by noting that we obviously have tremendous state leadership currently from DP that's putting out NJ-packed climate rules, looking at the future impact of sea level rise for coastal flooding. That is the definition of adapting to a warming world, but we need to go farther than that. We need mitigation. We need to reduce our emissions. And I mentioned at the opening, it was just 7 years ago that Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 8. This literally weeks into the administration, in that cramped control room in ACUA. At that point, the goal for offshore wind was 3,500 megawatts by 2030. It has now grown under the Murphy administration to 11 megawatts by 2040. That's the progress that we need ultimately to see to be able to fight the challenge that is climate change, and that's why it is still time for turbines 7 years later. Thank you so much, and next I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda Norvell, who's the Dean of Sciences here at Stockton.
Good morning. Nice to see you all. On behalf of President Joe Bertolino and Provost Michael Palladino, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Time for Turbines 7 here at Stockton University. First, I want to say that they both send their regrets as they are in other parts of the state this morning and they are not able to attend to join us today. Particularly, Dr. Palladino is sorry he couldn't attend, as this is his first year at Stockton, and he was eager to share his welcome remarks with you directly. So instead, you're going to get me, and I'm happy to convey his appreciation to the offshore wind developers and leaders from across the region, as well as the state and local officials who are here today on our campus to discuss many of the key issues related to the expansion of offshore wind off the New Jersey shore. At Stockton, we value our position as an anchor institution in this region. This year, the campus is working to develop a new strategic plan, and as we do so, community engagement and collaborative partnerships will continue to be an area of emphasis for us. We appreciate being involved in these conversations and look forward to engaging our campus communities in projects and collaborative opportunities related to sustainable energy development. The next 2 days promise an impressive array of engaging sessions and activities, and thank you for being here and for your dedication to advancing offshore wind in New Jersey. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Norvell. It's really always a pleasure to be here at Stockton. Next, I want to call up to the podium our government decision makers panel. It's going to be moderated by Eric Miller, who works in the governor's office and serves as the executive director for the Office of Climate Action and the Green Economy. Eric will be joined by really a all-star panel led by BPU President Guhl-Sadovy, as well as Department of Labor Commissioner Rob Asaro-Angelo, in addition to Megan Brunatti, who is the Chief of Staff for the DEP, as well as Jem Becker, who's Executive Vice President at EDA. So let's give a warm welcome to our state decision makers.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Start by saying thank you, Doug, for that introduction, and thank you to New Jersey Renews and Stockton University for hosting us all today. I'm Eric Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Governor Murphy's Office of Climate Action and the Green Economy. As Doug said at the introduction, we are very lucky to be joined by who I think represent the key decision makers on offshore wind in New Jersey, President Christine Guhl-Sadovy from the Board of Public Utilities, Megan Brunatti, Chief of Staff at the Department of Environmental Protection, Jen Becker, the Economic Development Authority, and Commissioner Rob Asaro-Angelo from the Department of Labor. And when thinking about this panel and what we would speak about, I think it's very meaningful that this is time for Turbines 7. And a lot has happened in the state of New Jersey. As Doug alluded to, he remembers Executive Order 8. I think about the first time I heard about offshore wind in the state, and that was, I believe, the first time I was in a committee room during the negotiations on the Clean Energy Act of 2018. And the field has really changed in the past 7 years. And a lot of that is due to the folks in this room, whether NGO, industry, but also so much has to do with the work at the various agencies in the state of New Jersey. So that was the theme I think we landed on, is that, where have we been? A bit of a retrospective, and where are we going as New Jersey's really beefed up its work on offshore wind. And I think with that, I won't, give my own opinions, but would love to get to the first topic for this panel, which is the evolution of the industry overall in New Jersey. Some of the folks on this stage have been around a long time, from the infancy of offshore wind in the state to where we are today, and have a very clear picture of where the state of New Jersey should be going. So my question for anyone to take, I won't call on anyone in particular for this one, is a lot of you have been around since the early days. Have you seen the industry evolve, things change since 2018?
I'll go first. Just for me, and I think this is my 7th time here. It's exciting for me also because this industry is our Department of Labor and Workforce Development. So labor protection and workforce development. And our work in this industry really allows our staff to be hands-on on both sides of that. Being a new industry for New Jersey, thinking about the protections of the workers working in the industry and working with our counterparts to make sure it's safe and secure, but also on the workforce development side, I've been super pleased with how hands-on the industry is about working with us. Way too often, industries or businesses come to the department like, hey, I need workers, give me some workers. But the industries involved in the offshore wind industry have been really hands-on with us about letting us know what are the exact skill sets they need. What do we need from them to help drive that workforce forward? Connecting with our local workforce boards, connecting with our educational and training partners like here at Stockton, or the other many apprenticeship grantees across the state who are working on some kind of offshore wind skill set. All of those aren't done in a vacuum. They're not done just by our staff. They're done with the industry at the table. So that's been super refreshing to me, that something where we're so used to having business sort of just come for us with asks. The industries here have been super willing to work with us to invest in their own future workforce, even though it might not be a job starting tomorrow, playing the long game with us, which is not normal for the kind of work that we do. So I think it's been a great testament to, one, the stick-to-itiveness of this government across the board, from the governor on down, and two, of the many players in the industry who've been sort of at the table with us the whole time on something that's not always thought about when you're thinking about starting a new industry.
So I can jump in. I think just looking at our solicitations at the BPU over the last several years, the changes that we've made from the first solicitation to where we are now in the current solicitation, I think we have really learned, in partnership with the folks up here and many of you in this room, what it takes to stand up really a transformational industry, and that's what offshore wind is for the state of New Jersey and the entire region. Right? It is transformational when it comes to meeting meeting our clean energy goals, when it comes to the economic development and growth opportunities that it's bringing to the state. I don't know what other, industry is going to have that kind of significant impact on the state of New Jersey. And it is really, it has been a real learning opportunity. I was here as a staff person in 2018, and we saw significant support, overwhelming support, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more later, overwhelming support in 2018 for offshore wind, and I think we have seen more visible, as we saw outside when we drove in, more visible opposition, but that has been, I think, one of the significant changes over the last several years, but we've also seen how important it is to be flexible and be nimble, which, those of you that have been in government or deal with government know that it is very hard to be nimble when you're in government, particularly around procurement issues. But doing that, and I think we have done a great job in this administration with being as flexible as we can be, and the way that our solicitations have changed over the last 4 years, I think, have reflected how important it is to be flexible, to work with the industry, to take feedback from the industry and other stakeholders as we have progressed our solicitation along the last several years. There.
From DEP's perspective, in thinking about this, I thought back to 2016 when we at DEP started talking to Dong Energy, who had recently acquired the lease off the coast of New Jersey and later became Ørsted. But we really had no idea kind of what we were in for and what we were talking about at that point. So, we've learned a lot over the years as far as how the industry works, even the mechanics of the infrastructure of offshore wind itself, the role of state government, the reviews and the role of the federal government as well. There's just so much that goes into all of it, and I think that from 2016 until now, when we first became engaged, there's been so much kind of momentum gained through the industry. And really what we've continued to learn is that we can make these projects better, and I think that we are making them better based on what we've learned, what we now know, as compared to what we didn't know 8 years ago. And so that's where the evolution comes from me. It's what we've learned and how we're making these projects better and improving the benefits of these projects across the board.
Yeah, and I agree with what everybody has said so far. So not to repeat any of that, I think from EDA's point of view, just thinking about sort of the setting the policies from the beginning, and then the continuing to sort of work hard, keeps the steady pace of moving these projects forward. And obviously it hasn't been all smooth sailing, but I think that ability to adapt and be nimble, as the president said, and continue to keep our eye on the end goal, but be realistic and make the changes that are necessary as we move along. I mean, if you think back, to 2018, right? We didn't have any awarded projects at the time. We didn't have the New Jersey wind port. EEW wasn't built. We didn't have any offshore wind specific training programs. We have made significant progress. Yes, we do not have the New Jersey projects up and spinning just yet, but we're continuing to make that steady progress forward. I think the appreciation for the sophistication and understanding of the industry and the partnerships that we're mentioning, I mean, that is so critical, and that continues to deepen as we move forward. I feel like when I talk about this industry, I often say that it has a really long lead time, but has a really long lifeline. And so, just really continuing to think about that and recognize the, quite honestly, the patience that's required for this industry. But just, as the opening remarks were talking about what's going on in our country today, how important it is to keep that steady state going and continuing to make progress.
That's great, and I think pulling out of that, it sounds like the big takeaways are the industry has been transformational for the state, and across all of your agencies, there's been a lot of evolution and a lot of learning and iteration. And I'll just share with the audience, as someone, in terms of members who are on this stage, I've been around the least amount of time. And what was immediately impressed upon me is the level of expertise and understanding that all of the agencies and their staff have on these issues, which I think, in my experience speaking with other states, is somewhat rare, not to throw shade on any of the other offshore wind states.
Feel free, go for it.
Yeah, this is all government, so this can be about how we are the best. But one thing that has stood out to me in every part of government offshore wind is, again, how nimble and how quickly folks are willing to learn. I'm wondering if any of you can share either a big lesson that you've learned individually or that you feel that your staff has learned as this has been evolving that's helped us move things along.
I guess I could start. I mean, I feel like it is a, you're constantly learning, right? I mean, this is, as I said, this is an established industry in Europe, but, it's still, an early stage industry here in the United States. And so I think building that industry knowledge and subject matter expertise is really critical. I mean, I think looking at, EDA, just as an example, and building the wind port. I mean, we have a whole team here at EDA now that, several years ago didn't exist, where it's, building a wind port and the construction team and the commercial team working with the, potential tenants and, the various, agencies up and down, from local government to, to federal government on what it takes to build such a massive infrastructure project. And we've done that, building the first parcel at the wind port, on time and on budget. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. The groundbreaking for the wind port was in 2021. And, that's for a giant infrastructure project, that's really fast, right? So I think that, that building up that in-house expertise has been really critical to moving things forward.
I think it's been sort of just also forced the hand of our staff to work across departments like they haven't, in a way, so much before. And I say, having COVID in the middle of all that, I think sort of, in one of the positive takeaways with that was the ability to folks just to realize we just need to get this done. There's no time to wait. So our staff, who's mostly federally funded on the workforce side, to be working on something that is new and state funded and doesn't meet the normal requirements for what a training program should be because the jobs aren't ready tomorrow, and having them be excited about learning about this industry. And I just met someone from one of the companies like, oh, you must know Ryan who works for you. And our folks on our teams are so excited to learn about offshore wind, to learn about how they can be tailoring what they already know about workforce development and about training and about placements and about job steps and to a whole new industry. But I feel like in the past, this is a cliche to talk about being silos in government, but it's a real thing. I think that everyone is working with I don't need to, I'm not doing this for the Department of Labor. I'm doing this for the state, for the administration. And I don't need to go get permission from my commissioner to talk to a counterpart of the DEP or the BPU or EDA. It's just we're all one team when it comes to these kind of statewide initiatives. I think it's been really a great learning experience for our staff as well that'll hopefully last long past this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to kind of being nimble, we have, when you are in an industry that moves, that has to move so quickly and has such a long lead time, as Jen pointed out, and a lot of the staff, are coming from long careers in government and not used to the kind of rapid movement and that's required to move this forward. I think we've all learned a significant amount about, being flexible, working with our sister agencies. And I think Rob pointed out a great thing. No one has to come to me to say, hey, can I talk to DEP or the Department of Labor or EDA about something? I hope they're not coming to me, actually, because there's too much work. There's too much work to wait for me to make a decision on that. So, yeah, just, again, being really flexible.
I think from a regulatory agency's perspective, the one thing that we've really focused on is transparency and kind of what we're doing and when we're doing it. And I think it's really important for the stakeholders related to offshore wind as well as the developers. So we've worked really hard, and we've always had to do it. But for offshore wind, we've focused even more on mechanisms, email blasts, our website, updating it very regularly so that stakeholders have an opportunity to understand what we're doing, where there are opportunities for them to weigh in. And that's important to us too, because we want to hear from everyone so that their comments and feedback can maybe be incorporated into our decisions where appropriate. So I think that's like top line for me, that when I think about this, it's the transparency and communication.
It's all great, and I will also offer, I think, an example of the level of coordination is my gratitude and also apologies for the amount of time all of you have to spend on the phone with my office just talking about offshore wind when I know you all have other things to do. But I do think that speaks to the level of coordination and transparency and trust across everyone who's working in the state right now, which is really something exciting to be a part of. And shifting gears a little bit, one thing that has really stood out to me as a big evolution, I think, in the industry over the last couple of years, or at least states' approach to the industry over the last couple of years, is a lot more coordination among the states, especially the states in the Northeast. When this all started, it appeared to me, at least from the outside, that states were pursuing kind of a winner-take-all strategy. Come here, build everything here. We want to win. And it was a bit of a zero-sum approach. It appears, though, over the last couple of years especially, that attitude, not just within the state of New Jersey, but up and down the East Coast, has really evolved. And it's a lot more, how can we grow the pie together? And how can the achievement of a project in one place help the industry overall and grow it in another? And I was wondering if we can talk about that a little more. And I know there's a lot of initiatives, some of which I've been involved with, some of which are more in the wheelhouses of various agencies, but about how we're coordinating with other states, with some of our neighbors, some of the folks up and down the East Coast. Maybe I'll start with you, Jen. I know there's a lot of time spent.
Yeah,
other
happy
places.
to talk about this one because it is a big effort of our team. So I think it's true, right? I mean, I feel like when I first started, there was maybe less. I think there was always interest in working with other states, but maybe not as much action on that, and that's definitely increased significantly over the past few years. So certainly we're looking, from the Economic Development Authority, right? Like our main focus is on the economic development side of offshore wind, right? When we talk about offshore wind, we're saying it's not just about meeting our clean energy goals, but it is about driving inclusive economic development for the state and the region. And so, looking at what those driving those economic benefits to our communities, but recognizing that taking a regional approach is beneficial to all of us. And so we have been working with other states for a very long time, knowledge sharing and trying to learn from each other what's working for you, what's not, and the greater sense of collaboration. Again, so we're now moving towards actual action and initiatives jointly. So, around the time of the New York Bight auction, New York and New Jersey and BOEM came together and issued a statement of collaboration, particularly around workforce development and supply chain, and we've been working on that. And that was followed up several months later between a multi-state and White House MOU about establishing sort of greater collaboration amongst the various states and the federal government, and then establishing these partner associations. So we've been working really closely, again, with all the states, but in particular New York. And so, there's a lot in the works right now. Hopefully you all have seen sort of the outreach. We're doing a joint supplier forum on October 28th. So that's the day before the official opening of the American Clean Power Offshore Wind Conference. That's going to be in Atlantic City as well. This is the third time that we've actually been doing this with New York. The first one was maybe a little quieter. But we did a big one in January last year in Brooklyn. Now we're doing one here in New Jersey. So this is a real opportunity to bring directly to our, particularly our smaller businesses in both states, bringing them together and getting them in front of and in the same room with potential their clients and sort of their potential market opportunities, and really demonstrating that this is a regional opportunity, right? And so a project in New York has an opportunity for a company in New Jersey and vice versa. We've also been working with New York on business training, so we have regular both in-person and virtual trainings for our businesses and organizations, just to get them sort of what's the terminology of the industry, how is it set up, how do you think about sort of how do you position your business to get involved in this industry. We issued a joint RFP with New York. Super hard to do, to issue an RFP with another state. But we issued a joint RFP to find a partner to establish a technical assistance program, so bringing to direct technical assistance to small businesses. So that's in the works, and hopefully be able to share more soon. Working with New York on a joint website to showcase various training opportunities for residents, and sort of ongoing discussions that we have with them about aligning on procurement and other policies. So that's just sort of a sampling of some of the things we're working on to really sort of put action to the words and sort of the vision of working together and actually trying to put that to work. So definitely a lot going on.
So I'll just jump in. I think that there's definitely more discussion over the last several years than the initial few years. I think New York and New Jersey, I mean, we know that there's a very friendly or not so friendly competition between the two states around a lot of issues, not the least of which is, standing up an entirely new industry that's going to bring billions of dollars of economic development to your state. So, we are still always striving to ensure that, the projects that are generating and producing clean energy for New Jersey are also bringing the economic development and economic growth opportunities to New Jersey. But I think, when at the initial kind of development of offshore wind and when projects started to get awarded, we did not see as much of that discussion. And then as we realized that things like permitting at the federal level, for example, we had a joint interest in seeing that those things proceed, both from a timeline and a policy standpoint. We've come together with New York and approached federal permitting, I think, jointly and with both of our states in mind. I think the area that we had kind of initially thought we would see more coordination is around transmission. And as I think many of you know, we have the SAA in New Jersey. And so we moved forward because that's what worked for our timeline. And I think that that's important to note, that while we want to be coordinated and we want to have discussions and work together where we can, we still have an interest in seeing the projects in New Jersey move forward and the benefits come to the state of New Jersey. But, where we can see, additional coordination on transmission in the future, I think we will want to continue to have conversations, not just with New York, or not necessarily with New York, but with states like Delaware and Maryland and those states that are also pursuing their own offshore wind goals, maybe not at the same timeline, but continue to have those conversations with other states as well.
I can jump in. One area of collaboration that I think DEP is super proud of is the 11 States Initiative that we started with New York and Massachusetts 3 years ago to develop a fisheries compensation approach whereby those fisheries impacts related to offshore wind could be compensated for, but done so in a way that is equitable, predictable, and also efficient for fishermen. And so in the past and as of now, these kind of agreements are done as a one-off negotiation between developers and the states. And so what we've developed is kind of a framework for that to be done on a regional scale. And so these states from Maine all the way to North Carolina, which is simply an amazing feat, have worked together for 3 years to accomplish this. And so the selection committee has recently selected the regional fund administrator, and that entity will be announced very soon. And then they'll be getting to work on making this happen within the next couple of months. So, that's just like a really great kind of example and model on how the states can work together. It wasn't always easy, but we did it. And beyond that, the kind of broader collaboration that came from that work. We spent a lot of time together over the years, had some in-person meetings that were really great, got to know each other. And then by building those relationships, we're able to have conversations together, share information and share experiences that are really invaluable to me and also to our team at DEP. So that kind of collaboration is critical, I think, in just sharing information and learning as we go.
Yeah, on the workforce side, we've been lucky enough to have some of our staff travel up to Rhode Island to see firsthand some of the work going on there. As I mentioned before, most of our workforce training is predominantly federally funded, and all of our counterparts in other states are working under the same regulatory scheme as far as how that funding works. We've been in constant contact with them, particularly Maryland, Virginia, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, about some of the workforce training programs, making sure that credentials and certificates are portable amongst the states and amongst employers. So it's been a really, again, another way for our staff to not just to do good for the state and for our workers, but also it's great career development for them as well, making these connections.
Yeah, that's all, I think, a pretty, at least as I've observed, rare situation I think you all described, and I think it is bleeding into, at least from where I sit, all types of other initiatives. You know, a lot of the teams that sit in your agencies, they're working on offshore wind, they're typically working on other initiatives as well, and having that type of relationship building with our counterparts in other states has been, I think, really beneficial. I think one thing I'll share with the audience is, you know, New Jersey is a member of the United States Climate Alliance, the group of states who signed on to the Paris Climate Accords following events in 2016, I think we all remember. But that organization has regular convenings. And what happens typically at every single one of those is I find myself in a room with my counterpart from Massachusetts, from New York, from Rhode Island, from Connecticut, and it turns into an offshore wind brainstorming session, just naturally, and then, you know, the Californians in the Mountain West or somewhere else. But I think it really speaks to the level of engagement, the level of trust that's been built among a lot of staff across different agencies, and, you know, just picking up the phone and calling each other. In the same vein, I think a lot of, it sounds like the coordination amongst the states is also to get together and make sure everyone is coordinating with the federal government. And that's a topic I'd love to get a little more deep into, but in the same vein, from where you all sit, how has our engagement with the federal government evolved over time, whether it's on the agency side, the White House side? I think I've been very impressed that, you know, when we're lucky enough to have engagement points with the White House, they are typically about offshore wind, at least for me. That's the only time they pick up the phone. But they do pick up the phone, which I think is very important. So I'd love to dive into that a little more, whether it's how the relationships evolved over time or areas where there's a lot of coordination that folks in the audience might not be aware of on the federal side.
I can start. I think on this topic, DEP's coordination may be less exciting than others, but ours is mainly focused on coordination with BOEM, of course, and kind of aligning DEP's work and the state regulations with the federal reviews that are ongoing. And so one of the things that we've been fortunate to be able to do is be a cooperating agency through the NEPA process that BOEM has for their environmental reviews on all of these projects. So for a number of consecutive years now, there's been ongoing environmental reviews, and DEP is really dialed into kind of what's happening, what's included in those reviews, and given an opportunity to provide feedback. As part of that cooperating agency work, we're also working with other federal agencies, so National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Coast Guard, and the Army Corps. And so, you know, we're just working together to make these projects better, and again, make sure that they align with our state regulations. So, you know, I think that's really, it has enabled us, though, to have, again, like regular communication with these agencies and develop relationships and learn from them and teach them as well from our side. So it's all great stuff for sure.
So I will say, you know, the responsiveness of both the White House and BOEM and some of the other federal agencies has been really tremendous over the last few years. You know, we saw a real change, candidly, from when we started our offshore wind program in 2018 to, you know, 2020. We don't have to talk about why that might have been the case. But, you know, we definitely saw like almost immediately, right, a really significant interest and excitement from the White House, from BOEM, from the federal permitting agencies about trying to work with the states to ensure that, there are no obstacles at the federal level that are preventing the states from moving their offshore wind programs forward. And, that was invaluable to see that kind of action happen so quickly and at the change of the administration, and has really continued in terms of the engagement. Just general responsiveness, really working with us on solving problems rather than creating obstacles to permitting and things like that, things of that nature. And, DEP has, I think, led that charge and been fantastic in representing New Jersey at the federal level. But just seeing that kind of interest and enthusiasm around removing barriers to offshore wind rather than creating them at the, in the last few years.
Yeah, so our work with the federal government is frequent. It's, like I said, they're a big funder of ours, but also we've gotten about $73 million in apprenticeship grants out under the Murphy administration, many of them about offshore wind, about skills related to offshore wind. So even though it's our funding, registered apprenticeship programs are still in New Jersey, approved by the U.S. Department of Labor. They've been great partners with us, approving programs quickly and making changes to existing programs to include new skill sets that are involved in offshore wind. You recently worked with them on the sub-arc welding registered apprenticeship program with EEW, and so it's been a great partnership all aboard, and I think they're learning from us as much as we're learning from them about some of these processes. And the great thing about registered apprenticeship is that once we create it here, anybody in any other state can take it off the shelf and use the same program that we helped develop here.
Yeah, I'll just add, so kind of following up on what I was sharing before about the MOU between the White House, the federal agencies, and 9 states around supply chain and workforce development. And our engagement with the federal government, particularly through the Department of Energy, is pretty robust and frequent. We have regular meetings with them, with the other states. So I think the leadership from the Department of Energy has been pretty significant in trying to herd the cats of the various state agencies, and New Jersey's been actively involved in that. I also think it's important to mention the LPO and the Loan Program Office and the work that they're doing, and really the connections and partnerships with the states to have them be, including New Jersey, participants in sort of the lending program to really help move forward on supply chain and financing for major projects. So the work with the federal government in the past few years has been pretty significant, and hopefully we're seeing the fruits of that engagement coming forward.
And I think what became pretty clear to me as everyone was covering that topic is we're fortunate to have a federal government who wants to work with the state to remove barriers. And I think one of the biggest opportunities, at least I've ever seen, is the Inflation Reduction Act. And as a former advocate, I assumed, once the law got signed, you were done and you got to go celebrate how great you did. And I'm now realizing that it is basically a full-time job to manage the Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. And the benefits are immense. And I'm happy to share with this group that I think as of sometime this month, we still need to add up a little more dollars. The Murphy administration has secured around $1 billion so far from the Inflation Reduction Act, so it's very exciting. Oh, thank you. But mostly thank the staffs of the agencies who are putting together, multi-100-page grant proposals, usually with pretty tight timelines, and whether it's competitive or formula, it requires a lot of work. But on the Inflation Reduction Act in wind, I'm curious for a reaction from the stage, whether, has it been a mover so far? Are we hopeful that it will help advance some critical areas, whether it is supply chain or whether it's impacted communities? I know there's been a lot of opportunities, but I think the federal government's been open with us that, it's not necessarily a perfectly written document, and they need to be flexible to help states take advantage of it. But does anything from the IRA in the wind space stand out? And I know EDA, I feel like, might have something to say there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a very remarkable piece of legislation, right? And I think the opportunity is pretty remarkable. And, I think I hadn't heard that stat before, the dollar amount, Eric. So that's, really impressive and exciting. It does take a lot of work to reap those benefits, though. So as someone who's been on a team on the grant writing side, I can say it does take a lot of effort. I think there's some things that need to be tweaked further so that we can, all of us, not just in New Jersey, but reap those benefits and unlock that funding. So I think there's pretty significant opportunity that's still on the table to be taken advantage of. We in New Jersey, we were selected for Department of Energy Transmission Economic Development grant, so really trying to drive benefits to communities and really trying to articulate those sort of the economic benefits related to in connection to new transmission infrastructure. So, I think we're really trying to be strategic about the opportunities and take advantage of them, but there's still so much more out there that we're looking to do.
And not specific to wind per se, but I thought from the beginning that New Jersey was going to be well positioned for IRA funding because so many of the parts of the IRA, I think they, copied from New Jersey. The incentives for paying prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon, no one has stronger protection on that front than New Jersey does. The huge plus up for using registered apprenticeship programs. No one has more apprenticeship programs, nobody has stronger apprenticeship protections than New Jersey. Require it for all public works contractors. Nobody has the kind of other worker protections. Our economic incentives now, after the Economic Recovery Act of 2019-20, we had the strongest worker protections and equity protections of any incentive program in the country, hands down, not even close. So I think that made us, all that work of this administration and prior administrations and voters and legislatures made us very well positioned to take advantage of that funding. I think it's something that now, over the years, folks sort of look like, oh, you're so stringent in New Jersey on this or that. Now we're going to really reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, I know we're at an offshore wind conference, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act across, across many sectors, and how this administration and under the governor's leadership has taken advantage of that. Just at the BPU alone, we got a Solar for All grant for $156 million to help advance community solar and primarily low, moderate income solar throughout the state, which has been an incredible initiative. And really, I think we got that grant. And if I may say that I think the grant probably, there was some thought about New Jersey when creating that grant, because New Jersey under the governor's leadership, led the entire country on our community solar program, making solar accessible to people who don't have a rooftop or can't afford a solar system on their roof. So that's been just an incredible initiative that the governor has helped lead. We also have gotten $263 million in broadband funding. Again, under the governor's leadership, creating an Office of Broadband Connectivity and getting that funding to help expand broadband to not just places that don't have the infrastructure, but also for people that can't necessarily afford it, or the infrastructure is there, but it's not directly into someone's home or apartment or whatever that is. So, it's, again, we love offshore wind. We're here to talk about that, but the IRA and IIJA have been just incredible for, so many infrastructure projects throughout the state of New Jersey.
So I think that sums up pretty well that we are all great. Everyone is doing great. Obviously, this is one of the most important industries to support in the state, and the governor's leadership on doing so has, I think, been evident so far in the conversation. But I'm sure, as some folks were looking for parking today, they were guided by folks who maybe don't support the offshore wind projects and industry and aspirations of this administration as much as we all do. And I think we've all seen it evolve over time. Especially President, I think you mentioned in the beginning, how it's changed over time. And I just wanted to make some space for all of us to talk about what community engagement has looked like. I know there's been some recent events that have been held in different communities, but Where does that fit in, whether it's the state's responsibility or the industry and our partners and NGOs who've all, I think, been working in various ways to be on the ground and engage with communities? But I just wanted to make some space to talk about community engagement.
Yeah, I'll jump in first if that's okay. Some of you know that I came from an advocacy background. And actually, when Governor Christie signed the Offshore Wind Economic Development Act in 2010, I began working in environmental advocacy and spent a heck of a lot of time trying to get him to move that forward. So, to come into this administration and see that happen has been an incredible honor, if I may take that privilege to say. But we have seen I don't want to say we have seen the actual support for wind wane as much as we've seen the visible opposition, come out. And it's so important as any governmental agency that we are responsive to people, no matter what side of the issue that they're on, right? Not everyone is going to agree with everything we do. Otherwise, we'd probably already have several offshore wind farms off the coast of New Jersey. But, it is really important to listen to the concerns of residents, of constituents, of, businesses, and be responsive to their concerns and be responsive to their questions about issues. And just last week, Eric was there with a BPU held a public meeting on the PBI, the pre-built infrastructure project, which is going to be the connecting project for transmission from offshore wind generation to shore. And it is coming through a few towns in Monmouth County. It's an open public bid. So this was a different forum than what we typically do. The BPU under this administration has held, I can't count the number of public stakeholder meetings, and my predecessor, the late and wonderful Joe Fiordaliso, would often, say whatever the number was that we had currently achieved in terms of public stakeholder meetings. Now I have lost count because it seems like we have done so many stakeholder meetings. But we were hearing from residents in Monmouth County. We were hearing from some of the local elected officials in Monmouth County, and raised concerns about issues that may have raise some concerns for people around transmission projects. And so we went to the community. We held a meeting. We heard from residents. We heard from supporters of offshore wind. I know many of you were there. We heard from the industry and all the stakeholders, and hopefully we were able to answer a lot of the questions that the residents have. But at the end of the day, we know that there is going to be opposition to offshore wind. Whatever the motive is for the opposition, it is there, and we just need to make sure that we're being responsive to residents and affected constituents, and know that we're going to do this in an environmentally responsible way that benefits the people of New Jersey, both from a clean energy and climate change perspective and from an economic development perspective. As long as we're doing that with that mission in mind, I think that we're going to end up on the right side.
I just say, in my mind, no administration has been more open on this and every other thing we do in this administration about public meetings, public involvement, stakeholder involvement. Often people say, "Oh, why are you involved in politics or this, that?" I always correct them. I'm involved in government. What's going on in here is government. What the work we do is government. What's going on out there is politics, for the most part. But on the other front, on the stakeholder outreach and bring folks along, many of the sponsors who are here today, who are on this sheet, they had to be brought along as well. Especially in the labor community, assuring them from day one that these are going to be good paying jobs, stable jobs, careers, that we as a state, we're going to make an investment into creating these careers and apprenticeship programs and everything else. So I think it's that we've already had success on that front, but because we've been making these long-term commitments. So even some of the folks who are supporters today weren't necessarily that way in 2017 and 18. So I think it's been a real testament to, and it takes hard work. It's not just lip service. And I think we've shown over time that we're willing to make those investments long-term to make sure that all people's, that folks who might have had concerns, that we will put them at ease with our investments.
Yeah, I think the work and importance of stakeholder engagement really can't be you can't overstate the importance of that. And that work is never done, right? It's a continuation and, hopefully deepening each and every time. So I think there's definitely been a lot of work that we've done in this space, and it's been mentioned already, but, I think there's that the commitment to continue that and make sure that we are being responsive, that we're putting out information, being as transparent as possible. We just established a new centralized offshore wind website. So, all of our agencies have information about all of our programs in offshore wind, but really trying to have a centralized place for people to go. So up and running now. You can see, nj.gov/offshore wind, and that'll link to each of our agencies' websites, but you'll also have a centralized place, frequently asked questions, fact sheets, resources for people to get information. We recently had open houses across the state, so giving an opportunity for sort of the direct engagement, asking questions, having conversations with representatives from state agencies, representatives from the different development projects with the community. So really trying to take different approaches to have opportunities for people to communicate and engage in different ways. We at EDA, we also have an offshore wind quarterly newsletter that we put out. If you're not already getting it, let me know after the panel. Give me your email and I'll sign you up for the next one. That's another way that we've been trying to communicate the different work that we've been doing, as well as opportunities for training opportunities or events or things along those lines. But this is not new. I think all of our agencies have been doing this type of work for quite some time. So when we actually started in EDA, just by example, for starting to build the New Jersey wind port, one of the first things that we did was actually convene a local engagement and diversity committee. So bringing together representatives from different institutions and organizations in the area helped really trying to define our targets for subcontractors, for setting targets for minority women, veteran, small businesses to participate in the construction of the New Jersey wind port, as well as setting diversity targets for women and people of color working on site. And that was really informed by sort of that direct community engagement for that particular project. And then just one other example, say for the Wind Institute for Innovation Training, which is the state's coordinated effort, so working across all of our agencies and some others to establish programs and initiatives to really advance on offshore and workforce development, education, research, and innovation. One of the things that we've been doing in some of those workforce programs that are competitive grants is making sure that there's representatives in community-based organizations as part of the training programs. And so the role of those organizations can differ from grant to grant, from project to project, but really making sure that we're trying to identify different opportunities. It's not just one way of doing this, but different opportunities to make sure that voices in the community, trusted voices are involved in these programs, and so that we can really get the word out, have that engagement, and continue to refine and improve the work that we're doing.
Well, as the representative of the regulatory agency on this panel, I will say that we have always been, had an obligation to do significant stakeholder engagement, public meetings around our permitting processes. So it's not new to us, and opposition is not new to us either. I mean, I'm thinking of a time when I was screamed at about a pipeline at a public hearing probably 10 years ago. So this has always been kind of the case for DEP, and it's not something that scares us away. It's just something that we learn from, again, that transparency and communication, kind of meeting those stakeholders at the place where we feel they need to be met with information and just developing relationships, sharing what we can when we can, and sooner rather than later, so that they have the information that they're looking for. And then also, my colleagues here have mentioned some of the opportunities that they've had, the PBI meeting recently, and also those EDA-led open houses. DEP was there or provided information and support. A lot of the times, some of the questions, or a lot of the questions from stakeholders, are based on the science of this technology and the impacts that are occurring in the communities. And so those are the things that DEP can answer and provide information and support for, and that's what we do.
Sure.
I heard this again this morning. When we talk about the jobs that are available, unless you bring the three entities together, and I'm talking about the community, the unions, and the industry, then there's going to be an issue in terms of the community is saying where the jobs are, what are the jobs, and how do I get qualified for these jobs? So there has to be a mechanism where the community and someone who the community trusts, because you're going out saying, oh yeah, we got thousands of jobs, we got good jobs. What job? What jobs? Are they part-time jobs? What the definition of these jobs? Another thing, how do I become a member of these unions? Because 95% of those jobs are union jobs. But what's the mechanism for the community to get involved? And unless there's a conversation between the churches, the community, as well as the industry, then it's not going to happen. So I just want to reiterate that. I know we're going to talk about workforce development later. I wasn't chosen for that panel. I won't be here, but I wanted to say it today. And you guys are here with at the head of the industry to make sure that those three entities, that there's a mechanism for those three entities to come together. Otherwise, then there's going to be an issue. And they're going to keep saying there are going to be thousands of jobs. And we're going to say, what jobs and where and how do you get them? Thank you.
Thanks, Reverend.
Reverend, I really appreciate that question, and it is almost as if you have a copy of my notes, because that is where we were headed next. So I really appreciate that. And Commissioner, this goes to a comment you made as well when we were talking about stakeholders. I think the question started about residents who might be concerned about impacts or views shed, and you, I think, had the right observation that it also means folks who stand to be a part of the industry to benefit from the industry. And one of the most concrete examples that I hope everyone here has had the time to see, and if you haven't, you should go see the Carpenters Training Facility to teach underwater welding. I have never been at a government event where more lobbyists or electeds or anyone who are typically cynical people were whispering to themselves like, wow, that is so cool, as folks came out of the water. So I do know the state has been putting a lot of effort into building our workforce and to try to open those opportunities for all residents in the state. So just want to hone in on that a little more. You know, what progress has we made, but I think it's clear and, you know, implicit in the Reverend's question is we're probably, you know, you can never get to perfect, but you can always improve.
Yep.
So what's been done today? Where are we looking to go next as we continue to improve the workforce pipeline?
Yeah, but by the way, thank you for your question, Reverend. And, you know, this is something we deal with not just in offshore, but in every industry, right? The Murphy administration has been focused on stronger and fairer since day one. And that means that we're opening up economic opportunities across the state geographically, up and down the state on income levels, the work of the Wealth Disparity Task Force, the work of our late, great Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver on this front as well, especially here in Atlantic City, my goodness. It isn't just lip service. We're doing this in real time. In the end, you know, it's up to the industry, up to employers to employ people, but we're doing everything we can as a state to make sure that, one, we're helping employers and community groups build capacity. We're making sure that we have opportunities where the people live. We're great opportunities here with Stockton, obviously, with community colleges up and down the state, making sure that they're doing outreach to the proper communities, make sure they're involving folks on all levels. The EDA just announced a couple days ago work for grants for capacity building for minority contractors across the state, because so often you hear a lot about problems with getting capital and getting credit. A lot of times it's just having the capacity to become a certified minority women business, owned business, and how to become a public works registered contractor to get on that work. So there's so much work that has to be done across the board, and I think that we're doing that, you know, day in and day out, whether it's talking to local community groups, whether it's talking to mayors, who are, obviously a great conduit, the members of the legislature, our educational institutions. There's nowhere that isn't part of our conversation. As a proud member of the Economic Development Authority Board, that is something that is on Tim Sullivan's mind all the time. And I just think that we're firing all cylinders on that front. There's always more work to be done. When I was at the U.S. Department of Labor under President Obama, I talked all the time about who's not in the room. Right, Rev? Who's not here today at this convening? Who hasn't heard about these opportunities? Maybe because they're working today at this point in time at their regular job. So it's up to us to find those stakeholders, to find those trustworthy community groups and message passers for us. That's something that we're committed to the last day of this administration.
Yeah, and I think just picking up on sort of the question that was raised and what the commissioner just shared, trying to bring those different stakeholders together. So sort of at the beginning in program design, so again, like the local engagement committee and trying to think through, okay, what are the different targets that we need to put together? What are the different resources that we need to put together to meet those targets? That's something that we're thinking about all the time. On the workforce programs and bringing those connections together, I think is really critical. And so the grant that I was mentioning before, the Offshore and Workforce Skills Development Grant, we made 5 awards for that. Each of those had to have a community-based partner that was serving an New Jersey overburdened community, right? So really trying to focus those efforts on the communities that have had systemic barriers, and we're trying to address those. So I see some of our grantees in the room today, and I think there's a panel tomorrow where some of that will be discussed more. But for example, we have a grant with the Carpenters Union to set up a pre-apprenticeship program, right? So how do you get into the union, right? And if union construction jobs are obviously critical and important, and the Murphy administration has been absolutely committed to that, but how do you get people into the union? Having a pre-apprenticeship program that is working with a community partner to attract people into that program, get them prepared and ready for the apprenticeship program. We've also, in our conversations, we were hearing about, a lot of for the union apprentices, there's an entry test, right? And so then making sure that we have resources to help people prepare for that entry test. So one of the grants that we had awarded was for an organization, for Ivy Hill Neighborhood Association in Newark, working to help those constituents prepare for those entrance exams, and so get that pre-apprenticeship work into the apprenticeship program. So really, really important. And then I think as the commissioner was saying, you need the employers to employ people, right? So the work that we're doing also with our businesses here already in New Jersey, so attracting businesses that are not here to the state to employ people, but also helping to build up the capacity and work for our existing businesses. So our technical assistance program, setting up a supply chain registry so companies can find each other, that type of work. The assistance, particularly for minority women and veteran-owned firms, right? So investing in that has really been part of our approach, and certainly continuing to do so.
I see the minutes ticking by on the clock, and I know it's us and then lunch. So in the 2 minutes and 18 seconds we have left, I'd love to close out the panel by asking you each, as it relates to offshore wind, what's an accomplishment you're very proud of or most proud of?
Wow. So I think advancing our goals and our solicitation schedule. I can't take the credit for all of the work that goes into, creating and evaluating every single solicitation, but we're now on the 4th solicitation since this administration started, and we have the 5th one next year. That's 5 in just the length of this administration, and that is a testament to the staff at the BPU and these other agencies as well.
I'll jump in. I think I'm proud of a lot of things and all the hard work that our staff does every day related to offshore wind, but one thing that is just incredible is the research and monitoring initiative that DEP started with BPU back in 2020 and included that in solicitation 2, where those awarded developers are required to fund $10,000 per megawatt of their awarded capacity to support research and monitoring related to fisheries and wildlife. that may or may not be impacted by the development of offshore wind. And so we have a great team between DEP and BPU working on those projects. Many millions of dollars so far between solicitation 2 and 3 and, solicitation 4 as well. We'll have some potential for RMI funds and some great work that's being done right now, including tagging of sea turtles, expansion of the MODIS network for detecting birds and bats offshore, the oceanographic and ecological baseline work that's being done with autonomous gliders, tagging and acoustic monitoring of marine mammals, and also eDNA to better understand fish. So lots of great work happening and lots of great work to come on that, but something that I think the agencies in the state of New Jersey are very proud of related to offshore wind.
It is hard to pick one because there has been a lot of accomplishments. I mean, the New Jersey Windport, from EDA's perspective, I think, obviously a huge one. But one, I guess, just to mention something that we haven't talked about yet today, I'd say is our Wind Institute Fellowship Program. So this is a program now in its 3rd year where we're providing financial support for students, undergrad, master's, and PhD students at currently 8 universities across the state to conduct research in offshore wind. It's across disciplines, extremely diverse cohorts of students. We started with our first year with 26 fellows at 4 schools. In our 2nd year and now in our 3rd year, we're at 40 students across 8 schools, and I think we'll be looking to grow even further. So I think this is a program that's I'm really proud of because it's investing in our students and that next generation and building sort of that thought leadership and in-state expertise. We're talking about subject matter expertise and how you have to really invest in that and grow that over time. I think it's been a really successful program to date. There's a lot of interest, and it's also brought together students from different universities. So someone who's studying at Rowan or at Stockton, having the opportunity to talk with a student at NJIT, so the other end of the state, they may not have that opportunity before, can now sort of cross-pollinate that research and relationships and networks. So definitely a program I'm proud of.
First of all, there's bats offshore, Megan? I thought it was safe out there on the water. I didn't know there was bats out there. Anyway, we've talked a lot about what we're proud about. It's hard to pick one. Certainly, our 8 different apprenticeship programs that are having some kind of skill set involved here. But quite frankly, just overall, just the ecosystem that's been built about offshore wind workforce is just amazing. Huge help from everybody to my right and all the work of their staffs. I mean, thinking about the fact that we have universities, school districts, companies, workforce development boards, all working together for their piece of the puzzle, quite frankly, is something that's not the norm in workforce development. Usually someone's just worried about their little thing. Everyone realizes how interchangeable and intertwined everything is. So I think that's our biggest sense of pride, and our staff on their industry partnership side of things, bringing all these folks together, being involved, and realizing it's not just our responsibility, working closely with EDA and everybody else here, like I said. So I just think that the ecosystem that's been created about workforce for offshore wind is something that I never could have imagined even a few years ago.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining the panel today. And I think to sum it all up, New Jersey has been and remains all in on offshore wind. Seems to sound like what I heard if I could only pick one sentence. Please give the panelists a round of applause, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. Well, I just want to have another round of applause for the panelists, because this sort of conversation is why we host Time for Turbines, to have an opportunity to talk about everything that's going on in this industry. I just want to walk through kind of what to expect over the next 55 minutes. We have a lot to pack in here. Just some housekeeping issues. If you're looking for wireless, it's totally free and open. The bathroom is right by the cafe. And then if you like social media, you can post using the hashtag time numeral 4 turbines. And then perhaps the most important thing, of course, is lunch. which is going to be right outside. And obviously want to give a huge shout out to our platinum sponsor, Atlantic Shores, which is sponsoring lunch, as well as our gold sponsor, Attentive Energy, that helped to sponsor breakfast and that lovely breakfast fruit as well. What to expect? We're going to have roughly about 35 minutes plus for lunch. We're going to come back here a little before 12:45. We're going to hear from our lunch keynote speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Chercheo, who's Associate Professor of Medicine at Cooper Medical Center. She'll talk for roughly about 10 minutes, and then we're going to leave promptly for field trips at 1 o'clock. We have some folks going to the Carpenters Dive Center, which Eric referenced in Sicklerville, so folks will be getting out right out the door at 1 o'clock. We'll also have buses going to the Rutgers Marine Field Station, as well as the RU Cool demonstration in Tuckerton, as well as the Stockton Marine Field Station just a little farther away. And then we'll have some folks going to the Atlantic Shores Eco Center, which is just a 4-minute walk away. And then the easiest field trip is right here, staying with the Manufacturing Extension Program and their RV. So a lot to pack in. Please go enjoy lunch, and then be back here in roughly 35, 40 minutes, and we'll get started. Thanks again. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. All the people inside the room obviously have lunch. I'm really excited to kind of kick off the second part of our kind of post-lunch program here. We're going to hear shortly from Dr. Lisa Chercheo from Cooper Medical School. We're about to launch on the field trips. And just a quick reminder, because this is easy to forget, but please hold on to the name tags. We're going to have the reception at Margaritaville right next to the Hard Rock and the Boardwalk, 1133 on the Boardwalk. This will get you in. If you don't have it, it will be a little more complicated. And then make sure don't leave this at home or in your hotel room tomorrow morning. This will also get you in really easily tomorrow morning. So hold on to the name tag. It will make your life a lot easier. I also wanted to just reference just the broad support we've had for Time for Turbines over the years, but specifically for this event, which speaks to kind of the broad diversity of support we have. I specifically thanked at the beginning of the before lunch Atlantic Shores, which helped to sponsor lunch, as well as Attentive Energy at the gold level. All of our sponsors help to make sure that events like this can happen, and happen in a way that makes them more accessible. At the silver level, we're deeply grateful for the support of Blue Point Wind, as well as Leading Light Wind, in addition to the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and then American Clean Power, which is having a great event in a few weeks down here in AC, as well as Embark, Community Offshore Wind, and our labor partners LIUNA and the United Steelworkers International. And at the bronze level, we have support from United Steelworkers District 4, so our local folks based out of Edison, the National Wildlife Federation, the Blue-Green Alliance, Eastern Atlantic States Carpenters, folks will be going soon to their dive center and get a chance to see what that's all about, IBEW, the Southern New Jersey Development Council, the Southern Chamber of Commerce, as well as the New Jersey Offshore Wind Alliance. So thank you to all of them. And with that, let me turn it over to Bill O'Hearn, who's going to do an introduction for Dr. Chercheo. Bill. Thanks,
Doug. Hi, good afternoon. I guess that gives more meaning to this, the phrase of "we don't need no stinking badges." Actually, you do need them. Hang on to them, if you would. I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing Dr. Chercheo today. And people who know me know that one of my themes that I run right into the ground is the cost of doing nothing. The cost of doing nothing. Today, one of the most important answers to that challenge is going to be handled by Dr. Chercheo. The idea that climate health is now one of our best tactics, one of our best weapons in terms of bringing home the value of clean energy and of offshore wind in particular. So she's got some great data. We had her on tape last year, and people, I think, really like that. She's here live with us this year, and we're excited to have her. She's a nationally known, regionally owned, and state-known expert on the impacts of the climate emergency on public health. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I am sandwiched in between lunch and field trips, very auspicious. Let's see. There we go. So why should physicians and all of us care about the climate crisis? I want to start out of reverence for history people in place. I do want to acknowledge that we're speaking from the ancestral land of the Lenape people, part of the larger Algonquin tribe, and I want to offer thanks for the stewardship of this unceded occupied land throughout the generations. So physicians always like to start off with a case because it really grounds a disease. It makes it physical, palpable, real. And I treat patients in Camden in an environmental justice community. One of my colleagues has a 10-year-old son. I will say about 1 in 3 of the kids in Camden have asthma, similar to other environmental justice communities. He was walking about a quarter mile or so to go to school. Every time he would get to school, he would end up with an asthma flare, every time. So eventually she had to start driving him to school, even if it's a quarter mile. And this is a small example, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of what we see in terms of climate and health, fossil fuel combustion and health. Because we know that when fossil fuels are burned, it releases both the greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming and climate change, but it also contributes to air pollution, which catalyzes and accelerates disease, and that's where I really get concerned. With climate change, with global warming, we don't have to look far, unfortunately, to see the disasters. This is pictures from Tropical Storm Helene, but certainly, we could take these pictures from any of the emergencies. Now, of course, Milton is hitting actively. These type of climate disasters are what makes the news. It's very visible. In 2023, we had 28, an unprecedented number of billion-dollar disasters. It's important to know, though, what goes into that calculation. So they talk about the roads, bridges. They look at damage to material assets, to buildings, to offshore energy platforms, agriculture, even livestock. But they don't take into account human health. They don't take into account human deaths. That's an important absence in most of the climate calculations that you'll see coming out from most sources, although I think there's starting to be a little bit more attention paid to this important absence. So those disasters are very visible. What is less visible, though, are the millions of deaths and the millions of people with disease that are generated because of fossil fuel pollution. So I just want to call your attention to one study. This was published in The Lancet. It's from the Global Burden of Disease. This is an enormous data set. It's 204 countries. The latest iteration of it, they went through all of these numerous risk factors. And it turns out that particulate matter air pollution is now the greatest risk factor for disease. The greatest risk factor. That means it beats out hypertension and obesity and diabetes and preterm birth and even smoking. It beats out all of those. It contributes 8% of the total disability adjusted life years. That's what DALY means, in case you were wondering. And that happens for numerous reasons. So it will impact vector ecology. We know, like around here, we see more West Nile disease, more Lyme disease, encroaching in different areas. In other parts of the country, there's endogenous now malaria and dengue being seen. We know that there are impacts because of air quality on numerous health systems. It increases cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, and of course, heat stress and the extreme weather events. So closer to home, this is from NJDEP. I just want to focus really on the temperature aspects because we just came off of a very hot summer. July 22nd was the hottest day on record on Earth ever. The rest of the summer was very, very hot, and we might think that here in New Jersey, because it's temperate, that we're relatively protected. But in fact, right now, it's estimated 445 deaths are happening from heat-related illness every single year. By 2100, it's going to be up to about 3,600. And we know that those are underestimates. Those are going based on current coding, what we currently have available, which again, we know that there's more. And certainly there's other impacts as well, impacts on water quality, on certainly extreme weather, along with the decreased air quality. An important concept that really undergirds, I think, all of these discussions are that of environmental justice. It's relevant to my patient population, but certainly across New Jersey, because there are red-lined communities, there are fence-lined communities that are disproportionately harmed by fossil fuel combustion, and these are usually the communities that have done the least to contribute to the health crisis. So not only are there populations at risk, but there are also patients more at risk. So pregnant women, children under 5, the elderly, anyone with a comorbid condition. And we know that about 60% of the US has some type of medical condition. 40% have more than 2. So already, this is the majority of my patients. It's the majority of people in the US. It also has these less intuitive impacts on the way we deliver healthcare. And now I had put this slide in here a couple weeks ago, not knowing anything that was going to be happening with Hurricane Helene. But let me go back and explain this particular slide. So back in 2017, when Hurricane Maria hit, it hit this area of Puerto Rico where they were manufacturing pharmaceuticals and bags of IV fluid. And when that happened, on the mainland, we had no access to IV fluids. There was actually publications in New England Journal of Medicine for how we do oral rehydration solutions. And I never would have thought that we would be doing this in the continental US. But now, there was an area around in North Carolina where they made bags of IV fluid. So right now, just on Monday, there were communications going out across the United States. Once again, we do not have access to IV fluids. And so we have to scramble and figure out how are we going to treat our patients. There are some good news, though. A lot of bad news there, but we certainly have some good news that we know rapid and substantial health benefits can be achieved with effective air pollution control. So in this first example from the Annals of the American Thoracic Society, we saw that within a few weeks of improving air quality, there was improvement in respiratory symptoms, cough, shortness of breath. And there was also these other tangible outcomes like less school absenteeism, less hospitalization, even less cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. In pediatrics, we saw that asthmatic children who move from a highly polluted urban area to a less polluted rural area will improve their symptoms within a week. And we came off of our Summer Olympics, but a few Summer Olympics ago, they did studies in Atlanta, Georgia, and they showed that, so the traffic decreased greatly, about 25-30% in Atlanta. At the same time, the ozone and the particulate matter air pollution decreased. At that same time, there was 44% asthma admissions, clinic visits, ER visits. And then once the traffic went up, then all the asthma admissions went right back up. But we know that we can do this if we put our minds to it. So I really want to have all of us focus more on public health, and I want all of us to see that wind and solar are actually a public health intervention, and that you all are doing important public health work in this space, because it's no longer enough for me to be treating a patient who comes in with emphysema or with a heart attack, treat them, and then have them go on their way. We really have to address the root causes of disease, and we have to address the social determinants of health, but more foundationally, the ecological and environmental determinants of health. So we are at an important junction right now globally where we can make choices to protect human health, to protect planetary health, or we can continue to inflict harm on our Earth by our irresponsible use and abuse of the gifts that we've been given. But we need to understand that climate policy is health policy, and that wind energy and solar energy are a health intervention and a very important treatment. So thank you so much for focusing on climate health in this presentation and for supporting the work for public health that you all do with wind. Thank you so much, and I'm open to questions. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions, maybe more if I talk fast. Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Always love your presentations. Your slides are gorgeous. You made me have to take some notes on what I'm working on here, too.
I can send them to you.
So, thank you. What I'm thinking and what we are very disconnected from in the general public is what's happening to people in Newark, you talk about, they walk to school and they, have these, respiratory attacks, and then when they move, it's not so bad. How these things are by design. And myself as an educator doing home instruction and going to homes and noticing years later so many children in the East Ward of Newark have cancer.
Yeah.
And we need to put them on posters, maybe not the kids, but the data, the statistics. Can we get some sort of reports? Because I think people think it's just smoke. But there are children who are becoming very, very ill. We just found out that Newark, the contractors didn't really change the lead pipes. So people think they can still drink this water. Just attacks on all fronts, land, air, sea, So can we get some sort of press release or report about the impacts on children and the fact that when they get to school, they can't even learn because they're so sick?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Because, I think when we bring it home to health, and especially health impacts on children, I think policymakers actually listen. And interestingly, there's a whole branch of research on climate communication. And when you talk to policymakers, the thing that makes them pay attention the most is neurodevelopmental impacts on children, which is very, it's not the heart attacks, it's not even the cancer, but that seems to be what impacts them the most. So I think, when you find those really tangible impacts, that's what we have to focus on. And we have to show not only the health benefits to it, but the economic benefits too. There are economic benefits when you have a healthy population that can go to work, that can contribute to the economy. And so I think, we need to keep on coming back to the positive health messages that will happen if we're able to transition to wind and solar, and just hammer that again and again. And thank you for all the work you do, because you're amazing. One more question.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been wonderful to listen to you speak about this topic, but how do we get other doctors, your peers in the medical community, to join you in this effort? I know you wear many hats. You are a part of a coalition of, I think, Doctors for Climate Action, but how do we get more folks to step up and echo your messaging?
Yeah. So, there's been a lot written about education writ large, and how, one of the biggest impacts we can have are educating our children. I also think we need to educate our future physicians. So I am part of Clinicians for Climate Action New Jersey, which is a branch of the Medical Society Consortium for Climate and Health. That's the larger national organization, which is an umbrella organization of about 60 different medical societies, all of which have an interest in climate and health. That's the American Lung Association and the American College of Physicians, and all these other really powerful physician groups that actually have a lot of lobbyists in Washington. So I think there's increasingly recognition at our medical school. I'm right now integrating climate health content throughout the 4 years so that our medical students understand that this is what they're going to have to deal with and treat in the coming years. And in doing so, we have to educate our faculty, because our faculty, I can educate them, but they go out into the community and they need to have an educated faculty body as well. So we need to be looking backwards and forwards and really educating the entire health community as to these impacts. So thank you so much for that, because I couldn't agree more that physicians and nurses and dietitians and people across the health spectrum have a powerful voice to bring to this. I don't know if we have time for another question or no. Okay, I got this sign. Well, thank you so much, and again, I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your work and for that wonderful presentation. It's nice to have some data backing up what we're saying up here. So I'm Deborah Coyle, Director of Work Environment Council, co-convener at Time for Turbines and Jersey Renews with Environment New Jersey and Doug. Just want to thank everybody for coming today, and big thank you to our sponsors that make this event possible. So now we get to move into the field trip portion of our event. So first, I have to make two quick announcements. One, you all have name tags. You're all adults. You can keep your name tags, but you have to bring your name tags back if you're coming tomorrow. and tonight if you would like. But so keep your name tags. And then two, I just do want to thank Nikki and Alicia for making the registration process so easy and getting everybody in here. Okay, so this is the field trips. Everybody should have signed up for a field trip. So this is for the field trip you signed up for, not like the one, oh, I changed my mind, I want to go on that one, because we have lists and we will check these lists because some of them are full. So it's only fair to the people that did sign up for the field trips. So I am going to be going on the Carpenters field trip to the dive center. Who else is going on that? Raise your hand. Okay, so our field trip is the furthest. So if you could get up and go outside, we have the bus outside waiting for us. So I want to get everybody out of the room that's going to be going to the Carpenters. If you want to wait in the hallway, I'll be there in just a second. And then Cecilia is going to announce the other field trips. So thank you. Come on, Seal.
Okay, the next one that's going to be going out, we have Doug. You're going to have the list, and you're going to Atlantic Shores. So anybody that's going to Atlantic Shores, follow Doug out the door. The next one is going to be, it's a twofer. It's Rutgers Marine Field Station and Are You Cool? That's going to be going with Bill, and Bill's got his list. Here you go, Bill. All right. And then Drew is going to have, and Drew is staying right in this room, and that's for the New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program, the Mobile Training Center. That's going to be in this room. And then the rest of you, Stockton Marine Field Station, you're coming with me. So you're going to follow us down, and Pete Straub. You see Pete with the plaid shirt back there? He's driving us in. So everybody knows where they're going. Good stuff.